Today we have Jen Smith, a personal finance expert and creator of modernfrugality.com. She is one half of the Frugal Friends podcast, and her work has been on Investopedia, The Balance, Dough Roller, AARP, and she's been featured in the Wall Street Journal, Forbes, and more. Jen, we are so excited to have you with us today.
I am so excited to hang out with you guys.
So, we'd love to kick things off by asking our guests to share their money story with us. And specifically, I know on your website, you note that your husband and you paid off 78K of debt in 2 years. You don't have to give us that story, but if that's something you want to weave in, I know our listeners would really appreciate it.
I mean, that is the start of my money epiphany, I guess it is, because my money story probably starts back to like growing up. We didn't have a lot of money, and so I got this mindset that when you get money, you have to spend it, and you don't save it. So we didn't have a lot of money, but we were always shopping every weekend. So it was kind of like this deceptive, like we have money, but we don't. We never were able to take vacations or big things, get nice cars or anything. So that's kind of like where my money story starts. And so when I went to college and I took out almost $50,000 of debt, I really didn't think I'd ever be able to pay it off. I wanted to. I didn't want debt. I took out as little as possible. I worked through college, but when it came down to it and I got my job at, $35,000 a year, I thought that was kind of my max. I thought 35, 40 was going to be my cap out because that's what my parents made. They weren't college educated. And alternatively, I had a master's and I still thought that's where I was capped.
No,
So
all adults just make $35,000.
that's
That's
what
it.
I thought. Yeah, at the ripe age of like 22. And so I I didn't think I'd be able to pay it off. And so it gave me a lot of anxiety and a lot of shame for carrying this thing around. And then I met my now husband and we got engaged. And literally, maybe the next day or 2 days after we got engaged, he was like, first thing I want to do when we get married is pay off my student loans. And I was like, that doesn't sound fun for anybody involved.
The
Uh,
honeymoon phase is really just getting spicy.
yeah. That didn't sound
Talk
like
dirty to me, honey.
right? Was not kind of spice I was into. And so it took a little while, but he kind of just explained his reasoning for wanting to do it. And it was never like, we're doing this. It was like, this is what I want to do. And I hope you'll come along with me. It'll be a lot easier. These are kind of the reasons I want to do it. Like, what do you want? And so it was just a really open conversation that made me come to my own realization that, yes, if I want to have these things I want in life, it will be much easier if we don't have the combined $78,000 of debt. So we decided as soon as we got back from our honeymoon that we would start trying to pay that off. Kind of use our new combined finances and just keep living on one income and put one towards the debt. And it was great because we didn't have that phase where we were living on two incomes. It was always living on one income. And so that kind of made it a little easier. I think ignorance is bliss. And we spent 2 years, what we thought was going to be 5 years. That was part of the reason I didn't want to pay off debt because I thought it was just going to be too long. I was going to spend the rest of my 20s doing this really miserable thing. But once we got started and we got better at making money and saving money, that 5-year goal dropped down to 2 years. And not only did we pay off the debt in 2 years, we also bought a house during that time.
Oh my
So
God.
it was crazy how momentum worked in our favor. And we didn't make over 88,000 the entire time. So we weren't making like big incomes. I got a little past 40 with my side hustles. But yeah, so that was what started this whole thing for me. And when I was really down while we were paying off debt, I started writing, like just journaling. And then I brought it online and shared what I'd learned with other people. And they started to respond to me and say thank you for what I was sharing. And so that is how I got into personal finance writing and now doing personal finance education full time.
And that's amazing. And I do think people benefit from hearing stories like that. And I so had you and your now husband talked at all about money before you got engaged or before you got married? Or was it like, hey, now that what's mine is yours and yours is mine, we got to figure this out?
I mean, we had talked about money in the sense that neither of us were extravagant. He is actually like borderline cheap. He is the cheapest person I know, I think. He has done things in the name of frugality I will never do. And so that was, I mean, when I met him, he didn't have a car. He used a motorcycle to save money on transportation. So I drove us on our first date. So, I mean, that's the kind of person he is. And so I knew that I was kind of safe with him, that he wouldn't like blow all of our money on things. It was me I had to worry about.
Which I think it's helpful when you know that the scariest thing is you, because you can somewhat control that.
I think so to an extent, I think. Yeah.
So
you
go
mentioned the distinction between like, well, you mentioned your husband's cheap, although I would raise you. I think our husbands would get along really well. Katie knows this. I say it all the time. But my husband's from Eastern Europe. Like, you know, minimalism is just a thing there. Like people just don't have a ton and they're very thoughtful about what they purchase, and credit is not a big thing. So, and they don't have student loan debt mostly because, you know, universities are public. And it's just money is a very different vehicle. It's looked at very differently than in the US as a form of entertainment. But you mentioned your husband's cheap or borderline cheap. You obviously are associated with the brand, you know, Frugal Friends. What's the difference, do you think, between frugality and being cheap?
Oh, that's such a good question, and I love answering it. So frugality isn't about being inconvenienced. Cheap is inconvenient. It takes your quality of life down. Frugality is just not the most convenient. It's choosing not to have the most convenient, but getting a little creative so that you can save some money, but it does not lower your quality of life. It either enhances it or kind of, you know, it's neutral. And so to me, that's kind of like it's not sciencey, but like if we're going like straight facts, that's kind of how I see, that's the filter I filter things through for frugality. Like if it is going to, and so it's different for everyone, right? So if like it's going to bring my quality of life down and I have decided that for me, then I'm not going to do it. I'm going to spend a little bit more money to have my quality of life enhanced or just stay the same. But on the other hand, I will not take the path of least resistance. I will try to get a little creative to save some money. And it just kind of stretches and challenges the way you live life so that you're not running on autopilot, but you're really trying to get the most out of everything. And that is a really beautiful thing when you're trying to really optimize your life to not just like be the best for you, but be the best for the people around you and the people who aren't around you. Like be a good steward of everything, your money, time, resources.
I love that you use the word inconvenient, because I think that another word for that would be like time. Like it's either your time or your money. And that is something that Catherine and I talk about all the time. Well, more things about time, but it's so interesting because it really is like, is it worth saving $2 if it's going to take you 6 hours to do something? Or like, is it really like inconvenience is a great way to think about it. And I think it's even bigger because I never thought about it as you're doing it more than just for you. Like you're not saving money just to save money. Like you're saving it for what that money can now do for you and your family and your community.
Yeah,
Um,
I
oh, go
think
ahead.
I think a mistake some people make is like seeing frugality as a race to the bottom. How much can I save? How little can I spend? And they almost see it as a challenge, and that's a real turnoff for a lot of people. I mean, the purpose of frugality is not the actual frugality part of it. It's what the frugality then affords you.
I love that. And so, what you said it's different for everyone, and we completely agree. But in what areas of your life do you spend more, or are you being frugal sort of across the board?
I definitely feel it across the board, but I love to spend money. I mean, I I think to an extent money does buy happiness. So I just over the years have found the things that I truly value spending money on, and have separated those from the things that I don't value. So I've tried to pull those apart and kind of see the root of what do I really enjoy. So I love getting pedicures because I just love that pampering. But I don't really get like massages or facials or any of the more expensive things because for me, I don't need all that. I just need like a little bit. And so that pedicure is like good for me. I know other people, it's massages for them. Um, I love to get coffee. Um, I still spend money on coffee, but I find creative ways to do that. So, like, I will find ways to get Starbucks gift cards. And so, like, I'm on this mission, like, all of 2021. I'm not going to spend any of my own money on Starbucks, but I'm going to find different ways to get it.
I love that.
Yeah, as long as it's not, like, inconvenient,
Yeah.
I'll do it.
Oh, please document that for us. Like, add up a tally at the end for your followers of like,
Yes.
this is how much in the end, like, December 31, here's my run out, right? My run rate.
Perfect.
Like this is what I got for free from Starbucks and this is what I paid for out of pocket. Cause I mean, I'm not challenging you. I feel like you might have to like, slip in a couple of cents to round up at some point, but I'm really curious to see how that works out.
Well, I'm on a roll. I haven't spent any of my own money yet.
Amazing.
And I do it all through the app so I can keep track of it.
Oh, nice.
Perfect. Yeah. So I just add the gift
Export
cards to the app.
Excel.
So yeah. So I find I know the things that I value, and I spend money on them without guilt. And then all the other things, those things I just don't care about, or I plan ahead enough to be able to afford them and like have them fit in my budget.
Totally. I actually was thinking about this so I'm in the middle of moving right now. My fiance and I just bought a condo in Boston, stupid expensive city. So just like we're just burning rent money on, so at least now it's going towards a mortgage instead. But one of the things that we were like gonna be super frugal about is not buying new furniture. Like it's one of those things where I was like, we can buy a really nice place and the location is really like important to us. But like, I don't need $10,000 of new Pottery Barn furniture. Like, that's insane. And so like part of it is we're gonna take the time and like refurbish some like old bed set that was in my parents' house. And like, yeah, it's kind of annoying. And yes, we don't really have a kitchen table right now, but you know what? Like we just saved at least $2,000 we figured out. And I was
I
like,
thought he was making you a table. Did that fall apart?
oh, he's in the middle of making the
Oh,
table.
okay.
He's in the middle.
I'm looking for a little
I'm
update
painting
there.
the bed. He's building me a table. We have no idea if it'll have 3 legs, but like
Gonna,
honestly,
fall apart one night.
I was like, but I was saying like honestly, I I think he's crazy in some ways for sure. But like in other ways, I saw some friends who bought a place and then immediately went into credit card debt to furnish a room. And I was like, I don't need that. And so in some ways it's like I definitely put more money into spending on the nice apartment that I wanted. But now we're being frugal in other ways. So I think there's a balance there of like some places you can spend more, some places you might have to make cuts and not have the nicest whatever it is. but you can still have a very successful life with that. So you brought up, happiness with money, and I saw this stat the other day. There was a 2010 Princeton study that showed that people tend to feel happier the more money they make up until a certain point, and they estimated that amount to be $75,000 a year per person. And granted, that was a 2010 study, so I'm sure that number has gone up with inflation and all of that.
Mm-hmm.
But yet we see people struggle with money at every different income level. So how can you define what like the lifestyle creep is, and sort of how you can avoid avoid the lifestyle creep, avoid like not being happy even though you're making more and more money?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's crazy. 1 in 10 people making making six figures or more are living paycheck to paycheck. And I recently did an interview on the Millennial Money podcast where she was working with somebody who was making like in the millions every year, like over 1 million, living paycheck to paycheck. And so it does not matter how much money you make to a certain extent. If you are like, above the poverty line and can afford your bills and all of that reasonable data. But if you are making the average American income, which is around, different studies show different things, but like 60, 70 a year, it doesn't matter like any more than that. More money only amplifies what you are already doing with money. So to be wise with your money at a lower income bracket, it will set you up for success when you are making more. And I think you should always be looking to make more money. Just because you're frugal doesn't mean you should be happy, or not be happy, but you should settle at the income level you're at. You should always be looking to increase that. But we get to the point where we're living below our means, so that when we increase our income, we can just do exponentially more with it. And so whether that is saving for kids' college or saving for retirement or more charitable donations, like whatever lights you up, we have a moral obligation to live below our means now so that we can do more and better later. And so I think that's a big mindset shift to avoid the lifestyle creep, that it's just so easy to every time you get a raise or to every time you eliminate a bill or lower one, to add in another, taco night every month, or another trip to Target. Like that is easy and you don't think about it. But when we plan, so when we're making a budget and we're planning long term, when those things happen, then you know exactly where to allocate that extra money. You know exactly whether it's going to your Roth IRA, whether it's going to a 529, whatever. So I think shifting your mindset to believing you have a moral obligation, and then also planning with a budget, those are the two big ones.
Jen, I like that you tap into that because, Katie and I talk about this, and I'm going to tie it back to your furniture, Katie, but one of our first conversations, and I will not forget this because I had just had my first child at the time. Katie had asked, like, what does a house cost? I had just purchased a home, I think at that point, or was in the middle of it.
I think I was asking like, when do you start like thinking about that?
Yeah.
And she was like, what?
But I remember talking about furniture because I had a friend who had bought a house and then just like went to a furniture store and like paid for everything up front on a credit card, 0% interest, whatever it was, because every room had to be furnished. And I was telling Katie, IKEA sells cribs for $89 and Pottery Barn sells them for $890. And there's, something in between. You can get, and there's a price point. Everything is in between there. But at a minimum baseline, the cheaper car, the cheaper crib, it still has to meet the standards, right? Like the quality at some point doesn't automatically mean that it's going to be better. It might look a little bit nicer. But it doesn't mean that it's going to do the job better. Like your kid won't sleep better in an $890 Pottery Barn crib than the $89 one from IKEA. Same, it's just like that. And
You don't
my
think they
husband
can
and
smell the authentic pine
I,
in that?
I know that's really important to
they
me.
just,
It's
they're like the
so
princess and the
important.
pea. Well, maybe
Like
your
so
children are
important.
royal, so they'll know. That's the test. But it's one of these things my husband and I talk about all the time, right? Like whenever we've earned more, like you're willing to like spend a little extra on the next level of wine, whatever it is, the next tier of pasta in the grocery store, that next level of, baby stroller, whatever the thing is. But actually, what you need and what you kind of like and can afford are two different things, right? So we've been seeing a lot, and I've, my husband and I purposely and personally have a lot of challenging conversations about minimalism, right? And it's been around for a while. It's coming and going in different phases, and I don't want to call them fads or trends because I'm hoping it's here to stay. But, Spark Joy came out. There's that woman who I can't remember her name, but she tried the 30-day challenge of not spending any money, or 30 outfits for a year.
Oh, Courtney Carver.
Yes, thank
Yeah.
you. So, there are these people that are picking up on it, right?
Mhm.
And every time I read about it, I'm like, yeah, and if everybody lived this minimalistic life, you really, to your point earlier, you don't need to earn that much. So, what do you think about minimalism when it comes to your money in your household?
I truly believe that frugality and minimalism are like this perfect synergy. And they are not the same, and they come to a head at some points. But for the most part, it's like that 80-20 rule, like 80% of it is just perfectly like aligned. So I really believe that the best version of frugality does include minimalism, because you save 100% of everything you don't buy. And if you need less and you want less, you buy less. And that in turn, that saves you so much money right there. And then you can afford to buy better things. So things that have multiple functions, like 3-in-1, 10-in-1, stuff like that, so that you can have fewer things and maybe spend a little more money up front, but it does save you money in the long run. And so that was something we never really had growing up. We just got the cheapest of everything. And it would always break. It never worked really really how it should. So it's a point in my life to have as few things as possible, but to have all those things like work really well. So I love minimalism, and my version of frugality definitely includes it. But then you have that thing where like I also have a packet drawer because I love saving the free packets from fast food joints.
I have enough soy sauce to get us through an apocalypse. We'll do this.
I have enough Taco Bell hot sauce to get us through if you need it. And I just love that. And that's me. That's my frugal side, which isn't super minimalist. And so that's where that balance comes in, and you choose the right balance for you. But yeah, I love minimalism.
It's interesting because I think I grew up in a very similar way, where it was like, you know what, we are getting the cheapest back to school clothes, and then we'll just get a whole new set next year of the cheapest back to school clothes. And you know what, you're gonna like go through those sneakers in about 2 months, and you're gonna, that shirt is gonna be ruined by the second gym class, so that's fine. And it wasn't until I was like an adult where I started to think about minimalism in relation to big purchases. And I think that's really hard for some people to think about. Like, for example, when we moved into this apartment, there's this laundry in our building, and it costs $3 to do a full like a wash and a dry. So $150 each. And yet there was a hookup in our specific apartment for a washer dryer. And I made the decision to buy a washer dryer for our apartment. And at the time, my parents were like, why are you spending $650 on a washer dryer? There's something in the building. Like, they were like, you are being luxurious. Like, don't do that. You do not need that. But I had done the math And that washer dryer paid for itself in a year. What I would have done for paying $3 like once or twice a week over and over and over again, that adds up to $650 in a year. And you know what? We've been in this apartment for 4 years. So I can tell you that I have 3 years of free laundry. And it's like really hard when you're looking at like $650 and you're like, oh my God, like I'm just going to upfront pay for all my laundry right now. But I thought of that as being minimalist because now all of that money that I just saved, 600 times 3 more years of free laundry, and I got to put that towards something else. And so do you think about being frugal? I guess, how do you think about being frugal when it comes to bigger purchases? I feel like it's easier when you're staring at, the pasta shelf, like Catherine, you said, and you're like, oh, well, I'll get the dollar pasta instead of the $1.50. But I think it's really hard when you're thinking about bigger purchases.
Well, I mean, but I think about the same way that you reasoned that out is how I think about it. And I would argue that that's a more important decision than the pasta. Like those are the frugal decisions that we need to be focusing on. Those are the decisions we need to be making because the ones that may cost us a little more upfront, if they save more in the long run, then that's being frugal. Like buying the 50-cent cheaper pasta is being thrifty, using a coupon. That's just, it's just smart. It saves you a little. But the things that make an impact are the things that are going to save hundreds, thousands. So those are really where we want to be making. We don't want to make $3 decisions in frugality. I want to get away from that. I want to get to the $300 and the $3,000 decisions. And so that's a benefit of frugality is that you can save faster so that when you want to make a big purchase like that, you actually have the capacity to. And that's why sometimes people say that frugality is for rich people because they're the only ones that have the capacity to plan ahead and do things like that. But I believe frugality is for everyone, no matter what your income is, because it allows you to save faster. And your fast may be different from somebody else's fast, but it's still faster. And it may take a little longer than somebody else, but it still gets you there and allows you to make those, $300, $3,000 decisions.
And I think you have a good example of that, Jen, right? When you were saying you basically primarily when you were really looking to hammer out your student loans with your husband, you lived on the one salary, right? And you kind of built those habits of seeing less money at your disposal. And if you can avoid maybe knowing that more is there to work with for icing on the cake, and kind of make sure that you're parking in all the long-term, larger decision-making categories or envelopes or whatever system you want to do, it can help you narrow down your focus so that you're being really, really intentional with your money. And Katie and I talk about this too all the time. I started out in my career in my 20s waiting to make money to save money, but you certainly can save more when you earn more, but why not start now, right? Even if it's small, even if it's just a small percentage, just getting that habit in place is what will make the difference to you in the long run when you do eventually increase your income over time. Fingers crossed.
Yeah, that's why we like to work in percentages. So maybe at your first job, you're saving 5% of every paycheck. And the next year you up that to 7 or 8, and then you're going to 10 so that your percentages are increasing, hopefully as your income increases. And so you're kind of saving relative to what your expenses would be. You don't notice it increasing, but the first few years are the hardest for sure. And you just have to get into the habit. We want to make all of these changes all at once when we realize, oh my gosh, my finances are flush. And I've never seen anybody do it. I've never seen anybody make all the changes they want all at once. But I have seen people change when they make really small changes, at first, and then just increase them over time. That's the best way to do it.
And I think this goes back to what you were saying at the beginning, right? Is your salary isn't just going to be $34,000 for the rest of your life. So obviously you figured out a budget for $34,000, but every year when that dollar goes up, you have to figure out what the new budget is for whatever that new salary is, and do it over and over again, and not have suddenly you're making $3,000 more next year and that $3,000 just goes towards, a trip automatically, or like spending before you even get the money. I did that so much in my early 20s. I remember someone telling me I was going to get a $5,000 bonus, and I was like, perfect, spent, that's on a trip. And then the next year I saw myself doing it again, be like, oh, well, I can probably go to New York this weekend because I'm going to get that bonus in 2 months. No, like
spending it before you've made it too.
Yes. I feel like that was something that was so, so hard for me to get out of the habit of thinking that, oh, that money's already mine, therefore I can already spend it. And then I remember it always was like 2 weeks before I got that bonus, I was in the negative or in zero, like praying for that to hit my bank account. And that is, it's just unsustainable.
Yeah, I mean, when you're in your 20s, delayed gratification is hard. The younger you are, the harder it is to delay gratification. And so we don't, and we go for that instant gratification, and then we build habits to where in our 30s and 40s, those habits are already ingrained. And so we're already going towards instant gratification, even though we don't want to and we know we shouldn't. And then that creates guilt and shame around money that we don't want to talk about it. And it's just this like vicious cycle that you should know, like, if you're in it, you can get out of it, but don't feel the guilt and don't feel the shame of being there. Know that that's just kind of what happens, because in our 20s, that's how our brains are still developing until we're 25. And so we're still like children. And that's kind of what we do.
In which case, Jen, what advice would you give like 23 or 24-year-old Jen, or, what is your most important financial advice that you would give to young women today?
I would try my hardest to change women's mindsets around money. And I used to be like really anti-mindset and like anti-woo-woo stuff, but I realized like so much of what held me back in my early 20s was the mindset that I can't earn more, that I'll never be able to get out from under this debt, that I'll always have it, that I can't pay it off on my own, like I need to marry rich. So like so many of these mindset things kept me from just trying, kept me from starting. And that is what held me back for years. And so I think if you can just start to slowly change things about your mindset to where like, I will earn more money. And so now I will live like I will earn more money, and I will just save this small percentage until I can save this bigger percentage. And just kind of live in the present like our futures are statistically how they will be. And not in this like warped, self-deprecating like view we have of our futures, but
like a scarcity mindset about the future. Yeah.
Yes. So yeah, I would say just like look at your mindset and like, is it holding you back? Then that's what we call a limiting mindset, and overcome that so that you can start sooner.
Katie, what would you say to 23-year-old Katie?
Oh, God, I'd beat her up. To be honest, she was just such a pain.
Slap her silly.
Oh, I remember I was like, oh man, I would not have been my friend at 20 years old. I am much better at 31, like as a person. I am much better.
Yeah, thank God. Thank God she grew up. But it's actually, I think about that because I'm like, I am just so grateful that I had someone like you, Catherine, and like other women in my life that I felt comfortable asking, what am I supposed to be doing? Because I think there's so many like people in their early 20s who don't ask that question, and their 30-year-old self would totally beat them up too. So I think like, I'm just grateful that A, I asked the question, and B, I had people that, could guide me in the right way. But I definitely think I would, every time I got that credit card out, I just like tap that wrist, be like, put that back, put
Mm-hmm.
that back. I actually was
Honey,
wondering,
no.
yeah, yeah, that's actually my favorite. I don't know if you guys have ever watched How I Met Your Mother, but there's an episode with Katy Perry in it called Oh Honey. And I think
Oh,
about it all the
honey.
time where, Katy Perry will say something and the whole theme of the episode is everybody goes, oh,
Oh,
honey.
honey.
And it's like over and over again. And that is what I think I would say to myself over and over again. Katy, like, oh, honey. Don't do that. We'll call this episode "Oh Honey" because that's kind of
I
where we're
think that's
going.
perfect.
I love it.
But I shared a couple of like some of my most like frugal things recently. I would love to hear like a frugal tip or trick that each of you has done recently or that you're really proud of. Jen, you want to go first?
Well, I'm proud of my buying my Starbucks with my gift cards.
Yeah, that one's totally legit.
I'm trying to think if I have any others. I think my consistent like favorite frugal habit that I've developed in the last 2 years, like since my son was born, is now I grocery shop online. And so I used to, and I still do go into Aldi, but I used to be like a Aldi like fangirl. But I would always get tripped up in the Aldi aisle of shame, which is all of their, like specialty things, limited time. Like it would get me. And I got some cool things, but I also got some impulse spends because that's what it's for. And so when my son was born, I couldn't get out into grocery shop. So I started doing online shopping at Walmart and just like picking it up. And I've been able to keep my grocery bill like still relatively low by avoiding, there's no aisles of shame or passing by something and being like, oh, I think I need that, even though it's not on my list. So, and I can grocery shop at any time. It's so great.
That's like a life hack.
Yeah.
Catherine, what about you? I know Bartosz might have lots to share on his frugal journey.
Making our own pickles? No, I'm just kidding.
Oh, I love that.
Love that.
So ours is longer term. Like it's actually one of the bigger purchases, but Katie and I have talked about this at length, Jen, but we bought our house on one salary, and we did that for a number of reasons. One is that my husband wasn't a US citizen at the time. We had recently moved to the US. He didn't have established credit history. It just didn't, it would have taken years to try to figure it out. And we were ready to buy because like Katie, we were wasting money on, near Boston rents. And we just knew it wasn't sustainable the way we were living. And we had a child and wanted to grow our family. So we really level set our expectations of where we could live and what we could afford based on the one salary. And first off, we're fortunate that, one of us earns enough to be able to do that. But as a result of doing that, when the pandemic hit, I was able to take an unpaid leave from work because that gave us the wiggle room. We knew we could afford the mortgage on the one salary. And my husband is currently not working. And that's also been something we've still been able to manage. We won't want to do it forever. And it's not, if we were hit with a few emergencies, suddenly we would dip into our emergency fund and need to, it would be difficult to refill our emergency fund at this point because we are down to one salary. But that has given us a lot of freedom as a family, which during COVID is something I can't put a price on when everything else is falling down around you. And you're like, how are we going to figure out careers and meeting schedules and watching our kids and childcare and all of these things? For us, that was a hugely freeing thing that makes it, even though our home is humble and maybe dated and, nothing unique or special, it's made, that's a frugal decision we made that has given us a lot of freedom, that I hope in the long run will pay off. So we'll see.
Oh, those are the frugal decisions I love to hear about. Like, I'm obsessed with that story. Like that, you can't put a price tag on freedom, and that is the ultimate goal of frugality, is to buy freedom.
Yeah, and being able to say no, right? Like I think that's the biggest thing. It's like you know, I think the greatest feeling is when you can say no to things, either spending or even in a work context. You know, there's nothing worse than feeling like you have to do this because otherwise you could lose your job and then you won't be sustainable, right? Like that's the worst feeling. And I think it just builds a ton of toxic resentment out in the world. So yeah, that's the goal, but we'll see. Check back with me in a couple of years whether we made the right call.
I mean, we did the same like last year. So we also bought, I mean, we use both of our incomes on our mortgage, but like we bought it so that we've always lived on one salary just because we were used to that. So that's what we've always done. And during the pandemic, my husband works in the airline industry. He was off at half pay for 3 months, and he was able to choose to do that. Like they didn't make him do that. He was able to be home for 3 months at half pay because we didn't have to worry about making the mortgage.
And it's so nice that you can make those decisions without having to stress or feel shame or guilt about like, oh, we just bought this house, but now we like need to take this time. The freedom and flexibility is priceless. Like you can't even put a price tag on what you've saved versus what you being able to make that choice. So cheers to both of you. You guys crush it. So Jen, we do like to end our episodes with a fun question so that our listeners get to know you a little bit more personally, even though they've definitely gotten to know you during this episode. But our usual fun question is, what do you skimp and what do you splurge on? But I feel like we got to know a little bit of that throughout this episode. So we wanted to do a different one today. So would you rather receive $10,000 today or get a 10% pay raise or increase in income?
I think I would do 10,000 today because then I can put it all in the stock market and have that time for compound interest to grow. Yeah.
I love that.
I like putting lump sums. Like that's what we did with my son's 529. Like I don't contribute to it regularly. I just put $5,000 in there.
And then just let it sit.
I just let it sit. Yeah.
It's so smart. And I actually, now that's what I do every time I get a bonus. I just pretend like someone gave me $10,000 or whatever it is today. And that just goes in the stock market and I never see it. Someday, like 60 years from now, I'll look at it.
Someday you'll see it.
Someday I'll see it.
Yeah. And it'll be bigger.
I hope so. Oh, Jen, well, thank you so much. I really love this conversation. And I love, hearing other frugal women just making some of those really big moves to set themselves up for success later on. And
yeah, and doing it unapologetically too. It's just so refreshing. I love it.
Oh, well, thanks so much. I love being able to talk to other people who just like get it. So this is fun.
See, 29-year-old Katie gets it. 23-year-old Katie is a mess. It's a dumpster fire.